Welcome to Scriptura's layer-by-layer overview of Psalm 1. Happy is the one who has not followed after wicked people. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction. He will flourish. Not so the wicked. The way of wicked people will come to an end. Psalm 1 is about those who will flourish in the end. Will it be those who live their lives like wicked people do, or those who devote themselves to the instructions the Lord has given? The happy one, or the person worth celebrating, is the one who will flourish in the end. But it's not always clear who that will be. Happy is the one serves well as a memorable phrase for this psalm, celebrating the person who chooses the path that leads to flourishing, like a healthy green tree that always has water. Psalm 1 introduces the book of Psalms. Good introductions prepare their readers and hearers for what is coming, so they're ready to learn and change their hearts and minds. The question is whether or not readers and hearers will change their hearts and minds in the way the author intended. The psalmist cares deeply about how people choose to live their lives. Picture two paths. One path which the wicked, the sinful, and the insolent people who don't respect God travel, leading to destruction. And a second path, which only those who are faithfully devoted to the Lord travel, leading to abundance. The first path must be very attractive, because the psalmist works hard to warn the people not to take it. Traveling on the second path requires careful attention every day, but this path is not always attractive at first. The psalm draws attention to the end of each path. The end does not look like the beginning. If it did, nobody would choose the path of the wicked. Psalm 1 divides into 3 sections. In the first section, Happy is the one, verses 1 to 3, the psalm describes the kind of person worth admiring, but at first describes only what this person does not do. The person worth admiring rejects the ways of the wicked. Instead of following them, this person focuses all his attention on the Lord's instruction, meditating on it. As we'll see, Psalm 1 is itself a meditation on the entire Old Testament, from the first book Genesis to Malachi. That devotion to the Lord's instruction leads to complete prosperity, which is pictured as a tree that can survive life's challenges and flourish no matter what happens. The second section, verses 4 to 5, we call Not So the Wicked. The wicked are the opposite of the admirable person. In the book of Malachi, some Israelites doubted that following God's instruction was worth it. They considered the wicked to be the happy and admirable ones. Psalm 1 rejects this idea and describes the wicked with contempt. They're like chaff, which flourishes alongside the grain until the farmer harvests it, separates it from the grain, and throws it away. A time of judgment will come when the Lord will separate the wicked people from the righteous people. Then they will be gone, and there will be no wicked among the righteous people who remain. The final section is verse 6, Because the Lord. It can feel like wishful thinking to imagine that the righteous will always prosper and the wicked will be judged. How can the psalmist claim with confidence that this is wise teaching and not simply trying to persuade people to live morally? Because the Lord. In short, because the Lord is closely involved and ensures what will happen in the end. A tree prospers when it gets enough water, because the water provides what the tree needs. A righteous person prospers when he is devoted to the instruction of the Lord, because the Lord provides what the person needs. Presenting the end result of life for the righteous and the wicked side by side implies poetically that the Lord is also responsible for how the wicked end up. They die because the Lord is not providing for them, and without his provision, they die. Psalm 1 introduces several connected themes. In Malachi, people grumbled that the wicked were the ones flourishing, so it makes sense to celebrate them. Psalm 1 says the opposite. Even though wicked people may flourish for a short time while they ignore the Lord, the people who follow the Lord's instructions will flourish in the end. Following the Lord's instruction is worthwhile. The real question is not how to think about the wicked, but how to think about the Lord and being devoted to him. The wicked will not last, but the righteous want to last, so they must pay attention to the Lord's instruction. Then, not only will they last, but they will flourish. And flourishing is the ultimate goal. Flourishing comes from following the Lord's instruction. In the Hebrew Bible, The book of Psalms comes right after the book of Malachi, and one of the main themes in Malachi is this very question. Who really is happy? Who is worth admiring? Many people are saying, serving God is futile. We call the arrogant happy. Evildoers prosper. This belief was a serious challenge to the question of whether God and his instruction were worth their attention. This psalm challenges the assumption that the wicked are the happy ones, the fortunate ones. This psalm will offer a different answer to who is really happy. The people of Israel were a farming community, and Psalm 1 uses imagery from farming to teach the right perspective to have. When a farmer grows grain, the grain grows inside the husks. The husks cling to the grain, surrounding it and protecting it while it grows. When the grain is ripe, the farmers cut it down or harvest it, and then thresh it, which is a process of beating the grain until the husks are crushed in order to loosen the husk from the grain it covers. When the farmers winnow the grain, the husks and grain are separated, and the husks, now called chaff, either blow away in the wind, or the farmer burns them, or feeds them to animals as scraps. The farmers only keep the good grain, now separated from the husks, to use for food. The farmer doesn't keep the chaff, the husks, but they aren't a problem. Once they have served their purpose, protecting the grain as it grows, they're no longer needed. They're separated and discarded. This is the image used to describe the wicked. They may flourish alongside the righteous, but then they will be separated out and discarded. The separation of husks and grain at harvest is a picture of God separating the wicked and the righteous on his day of judgment. When God created the world, he began by creating a garden. The idea of a garden paradise was an ancient image of a perfect life, and successful kings would show how powerful they were by planting extravagant and beautiful gardens. When a king would conquer new lands, he would often bring back trees representing that land to plant them in his garden as trophies of his victory. These gardens also honored the king's traditional gods, who they believed had made him successful. People understood that the garden belonged to the god. People living in the ancient Near East knew how important water was to allow plants to flourish. So the gardens were designed to include streams of water, so that, even in a hot and dry climate with little rain, the gardens could be full of green and flourishing plants. The imagery of transplanting trees and providing water channels refers to this deliberate care which makes it possible for transplanted trees to thrive. We'll now walk through the psalm section by section.
Happy is the one who has not walked in the counsel of wicked people, has not taken a stand in the way of sinful people, and has not settled in the dwelling place of insolent people. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on his instruction day and night. And he will become like a tree transplanted beside water channels, that gives its fruit in its season, and whose leaves do not wither, and he will cause all that he does to flourish.
Happy is the one is the closest English translation for the Hebrew phrase that introduces the kind of person worth admiring. This first section describes both what this person does and does not do, which is typical of wisdom literature, which uses striking and clear contrasts to communicate cultural virtues. Verse 1 is a masterpiece in itself. It uses the imagery of a journey in which a traveler must first receive advice or instructions for his journey. The journey then progresses in stages until the traveler reaches its final destination. The syntax actually creates a step-like structure, often translated as not walking, to not standing, to not sitting, though these steps are probably better understood as part of a nomadic lifestyle. Not walking to not taking a stand, or not committing to do more than pass through a place, to finally not settling in a dwelling place. The first surface-level reading provides a picture of a person gradually coming to a stop, while reading this using the picture of a nomadic life provides a similar picture, but on a larger scale, of a nomad setting out in a given direction, committing to a path, and eventually settling down to live in a new place. In both cases, the traveler first considers a possibility, and then eventually makes a commitment. There's also a progression in the descriptions of the people, from generic wicked people to sinful people who are characterized by their wrong actions, to insolent people who actively show contempt for others by despising and mocking them. The progression is the key element, because at the beginning of the path, the final destination is not obvious. The psalmist connects the beginning and the end to show that it is one and the same path. Starting with listening to the counsel of the wicked, ends in adopting the character of the insolent, despising neighbors, which is the opposite of the end of a path following God's law, which leads to loving neighbors. Instead of following the path that leads to despising neighbors, this admirable person follows a different path, devoting himself to the instruction of the Lord. He does not see this devotion to the Lord as a chore or duty. This person delights in the Lord's instruction, which means it pleases him very much. It makes sense from the overall message of the psalm that he is so pleased with the Lord's instruction. This devotion is the beginning of a path that leads to abundance and flourishing. So the person delights in that first step towards success. The poetry engages the emotions by first making the reader feel troubled about the final destination of the path of the wicked. Then it moves to the pleasure of the best flourishing and the first steps toward that goal. The righteous person desires the Lord's instruction, which leads to prosperity, so strongly that the person meditates on it day and night. A Hebrew idiom that means continually. To meditate means to speak softly to oneself, as if thinking out loud. Because the Lord's instruction was the written scripture, this could refer to reciting it out loud. The word translated instruction is the same word as the law of the Lord. The word instruction is Torah, which sometimes refers to the first 5 books of the Bible, but often simply refers to all of the Lord's teaching in Scripture. The allusions within Psalm 1 to many books of the Hebrew Bible suggest that it refers to all of the Lord's teaching, not simply the first 5 books. Meditation on the Lord's instruction is much more than reading or reciting the passages individually. Much of the language of the psalm is actually taken from other passages of Scripture. For example, these verses allude to Deuteronomy 6:7, which encourages people to talk about the Lord's commandments, whether sitting at home or walking along the road, with 3 of the same words in verse 1. The psalmist gives the listeners an implicit choice. Either follow the advice in Deuteronomy and talk about the Lord's instruction all throughout life, or follow the path of the wicked and live without reference to the Lord's instruction. This is the same choice given Joshua, which verse 2 alludes to. In Joshua 1:8, God commands him to keep the book of the law, or instruction, always on his lips, meditating on it day and night, the same words in verse 2. The psalm encourages the righteous to meditate, and at the same time actually provides an example by meditating on the instruction already given. See our resource site online for more examples of allusions to Scripture in this psalm. The psalmist describes the destination of this path with rich imagery of a royal garden, the garden of God, of course, which is the Garden of Eden. Land that frequently got lots of water was rare, so having a source of water was always a critical issue for surviving, let alone thriving. That desperate need for water, in order to allow people to live, becomes the central pivot for this psalm. With water, there can be life. Without water, a person can only die. With water, a tree becomes a source of life. With its fruit, its leaves, its shelter, the water makes all the difference. The Hebrew phrase, he meditates day and night, sounds very much like the phrase, beside water channels, subtly connecting the idea of meditating on the Lord's instruction with the trees drinking up water from irrigation channels. The tree that is constantly watered thrives. It always bears fruit. Its leaves never wither, and it can flourish in all seasons. This is the image of the person who meditates on the Lord's instruction. It enables him to always bear fruit, the idea of good works. It enables him to not wither or fear calamity, and it enables him to flourish in all he does. Once again, there is an allusion to another passage. When Joseph was a slave in Egypt, the Lord caused all that he did to flourish. Those who recognize the passage will know instantly that this refers to when Joseph was a slave. The circumstances make the point that much stronger. As a gardener might take a tree from a place with little water and plant it in his garden, so God might take his people from distress and yet provide for them so that they might truly flourish in all things. The allusion to Joseph adds this to the text. On the surface, verse 3 might be read as an idealistic picture of flourishing, ignoring all the difficulties life brings. But when read against Genesis, it becomes richly nuanced. Joseph had been kidnapped and sold into slavery, and yet, so far from his native home, God still caused him to flourish. This hints at the end of the psalm. All the flourishing comes from God's doing, not the circumstances.
Not so the wicked people. Instead, they will be like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, wicked people will not stand firm in the judgment, and sinful people will not stand in the group of righteous people.
As for the wicked, we're now in our second section. In the book of Malachi, they were considered by some the happy ones, to be celebrated for their life of ease. The psalm doesn't contradict the reality that the wicked have indeed flourished, but it looks at their success within a story, the story of grain. In order for grain to grow healthy and strong, it needs the outer husk to protect the grain inside. But when the grain is ripe, the husks are no longer needed. After harvesting, threshing, beating the grain, separates the husks from the kernels of grain. The husks become known as the chaff. Winnowing is the process of getting rid of the chaff by letting the wind blow it away. When the psalmist uses the imagery of chaff for the wicked, he claims that they really did flourish, but only for a limited time. Their destination is to be discarded. This description sets up two contrasting images. The psalmist contrasts a flourishing tree, which is a source of life and usefulness to so many, to chaff, the end of life and usefulness. The two words even sound very similar in Hebrew, highlighting this contrast. This completes the picture of the two separate paths. The one starts with listening to the counsel of the wicked and ends up like chaff, dead and useless. The other starts with the instruction of the Lord and ends with flourishing and usefulness to many. In verse 5, the psalm interprets the imagery for the reality of the wicked. Being like chaff, blown away by the wind, refers to being separated from the righteous. First, that means that in a judgment court, the wicked are condemned as guilty and the righteous declared innocent, just as the threshing separates the grain and chaff. To stand firm means to be found innocent in the judgment court. Those who do not stand firm are condemned as guilty. The next step is only hinted at. The punishment is removing the wicked from the righteous. When the chaff is fully blown away, only the kernels of grain are left. The wicked will be fully removed, and then there will be no more wicked or sinful people among the group of righteous people. This theme is captured in a lovely word and sound play. At the beginning of the psalm, the righteous person is not in the council of the wicked people, ba'atzath rasha'im. And at the end of the psalm, the wicked are not in the group of the righteous people, ba'adath tzadikim. Both phrases sound very similar in Hebrew, highlighting the poetic reversal. Just as the righteous aren't among the wicked, so the wicked won't be among the righteous. The righteous refused to take a stand with the wicked or the sinful, and the wicked will not be able to stand among the righteous. The groups cannot exist together in the end. Verse 5 concludes the body of the psalm, and it is here that we find the inclusio, or bookends, of who stands where. In verse 1, the righteous did not stand among the wicked. Here at the end, the wicked do not stand among the righteous. This is the message of the body. The beginning presents the choice to follow the path of the righteous, refusing to stand among the wicked. The beginning will determine the end, because those who did choose to stand among the wicked will end up not standing among the righteous.
Because the Lord cares for the way of righteous people, and the way of wicked people will come to an end.
Verse 6 is the conclusion to the psalm, which we have called Because the Lord. This slightly odd heading is a reminder that what happens with the wicked and the righteous is not what people would automatically expect. Again, if the destination of each path were obvious from the beginning, everyone would choose the path that leads to flourishing. Verse 6 reveals why the message is reliable, even if not obvious. Because the Lord is involved. He cares for the way of the righteous. This Hebrew word can also mean watching over or protecting, including that same sense of knowing another person intimately and caring for them that makes it possible for the relationship to flourish. So the reason the righteous flourish like a life-giving tree is that the Lord is caring for them and makes it possible for them to flourish. Without the Lord, they'd be vulnerable in difficult circumstances. But with the Lord caring for them, their circumstances do not matter because He is more powerful than circumstances. The image of the garden comes a little more into focus. The Lord is like the gardener, the one who prepared the water channels and transplanted the tree so it could flourish. That is how a gardener looks after a tree, and that is how the Lord looks after the righteous. He prepares everything so the person can flourish. Though the last line of verse 6 only says that the way of wicked people will come to an end, interpreting the meaning depends on the context of all the poetry and imagery of the psalm. Wicked people do not come to an end just because of circumstances. They come to an unavoidable end when the Lord is not caring for them. The Lord is the judge, the one who separates the righteous and the wicked, and makes sure that the wicked are removed from among the righteous. The word for the wind that blows the chaff away is the same word for spirit, which subtly hints that God is at work in judging the wicked, just as the wind is at work in blowing away the chaff. The final end for the way or path of the wicked is a dead end, perishing, because the Lord is at work, making sure that people get the just end they deserve. Psalm 1 is an intricate poem in so many ways. It models meditating on Scripture by weaving together different biblical passages. It contrasts flourishing, shown by the tree, with the useless and discarded, shown by the chaff. It contrasts two ways or paths that begin with counsel or instruction and end at very different destinations. It uses the imagery of the process of growing, harvesting, threshing, and winnowing grain to describe the relationship between the righteous and the wicked. For even more explanations of the poetry and beauty of Psalm 1, see our resource site. For example, regarding the judgment and the identity of the righteous person. All the images and comparisons are combined to make the same poetic argument. There are two paths, two options for how to live. One starts with listening to the counsel or instruction of the wicked and ends with being discarded and useless. The other starts with being devoted to the instruction of the Lord and ends with flourishing. People's decisions do not naturally cause this to happen, but it will always happen because the Lord makes it so. For those who desire to flourish, there's only one conclusion. Devoting oneself to the instruction of the Lord is worth everything. We'll now have a dramatic reading of the entire psalm that brings everything together.
Happy is the one who has not walked in the counsel of wicked people, has not taken a stand in the way of sinful people, and has not settled in the dwelling place of insolent people. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on his instruction day and night. And he will become like a tree, transplanted beside water channels, that gives its fruit in its season, and whose leaves do not wither, and he will cause all that he does to flourish. Not so the wicked people. Instead, they will be like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, wicked people will not stand firm in the judgment, and sinful people will not stand in the group of righteous people, because the Lord cares for the way of righteous people, and the way of wicked people will come to an end.